Welcome to a battlefield of minds. Two grandmasters face off where every move cuts like a sword. One mistake, and it's over. This isn't just chess. It's war, disguised as strategy. Let's dive in, move by move, into this epic clash. Wesley So opens with e4, thrusting his king pawn forward like a spear to seize space and challenge Kramnik immediately. Vladimir Kramnik answers with e5, staking his own claim in the center and signaling a direct, uncompromising battlefield ahead. Wesley So develops nf3, targeting the e5 pawn while bringing swift pressure that forces Kramnik to stay sharp from the start. Vladimir Kramnik replies n6e, reinforcing the center and preparing solid development as he eyes future counters against Wesley's setup. Wesley So plays bb5, pinning the knight and injecting Spanish tension that hints at deep strategic storms rising soon. Vladimir Kramnik counters with nf6, challenging the center and daring Wesley to reveal whether tactics or structure guides his intentions. Wesley So castles 0-0, securing his king and activating the rook, ready to strike the moment Kramnik missteps in the center. Vladimir Kramnik lunges with nc4, grabbing the pawn boldly and dragging the game into immediate tactical chaos full of sharp turns. Wesley So responds d4, pushing the center open and challenging that adventurous knight, demanding Kramnik justify his early greed. Vladimir Kramnik retreats n10, pulling the knight to safety while maintaining pressure, forming an awkward yet resilient defensive stance. Wesley So captures bx6 shattering black's queenside structure and signaling a plan to squeeze weaknesses relentlessly throughout the middle game. Vladimir Kramnik recaptures dx8, accepting doubled pawns but opening lines, hoping dynamic play compensates for structural scars. Wesley So strikes with dsf5, removing central tension decisively and forcing Kramnik into calculating sharp continuations under pressure. Vladimir Kramnik answers nf5, repositioning actively to challenge weaknesses and generate counterplay before Wesley fully consolidates material gains. Wesley So snaps off qx8, trading queens immediately and dragging Kramnik's king into the open where danger always lurks. Vladimir Kramnik replies kx8, accepting the exposed king and preparing a long defensive grind against Wesley's well-coordinated forces. Wesley So continues with h3, pushing back potential knight jumps and preparing quiet control before unleashing the next tactical wave. Vladimir Kramnik plays nis7, rerouting the knight towards safer squares and seeking counter chances despite his vulnerable king position. Wesley So develops nc3, strengthening central control and marshalling his pieces for increasing pressure against Kramnik's unstable defenses. Vladimir Kramnik answers bd7, developing calmly and shielding key squares as he braces for Wesley's coming attacks. Wesley So unleashes n5, leaping forward aggressively and threatening immediate trouble around Kramnik's weakened kingside formation. Vladimir Kramnik steps to k8, hiding his king slightly and hoping to dodge the growing tactical storms aimed at him. Wesley So advances e6, ripping open lines with fiery intent and forcing Kramnik to react to explosive central threats. Vladimir Kramnik replaces bx6, eliminating the dangerous pawn, but allowing the position to flare with more tactical possibilities. Wesley So captures c6, grabbing material while pulling pieces deeper into enemy territory, tightening the noose around Kramnik's king. Vladimir Kramnik responds fx6, accepting doubled pawns again, but opening files that could help defend or counterattack later. Wesley So plays re1, lining his rook directly against the central king, and preparing decisive pressure on weakened dark squares. Vladimir Kramnik moves kf7, shuffling his king toward relative safety and seeking stability despite massive structural fractures. Wesley So jumps ne4, centralizing power and threatening multiple ideas that stretch Kramnik's defense to its breaking point. Vladimir Kramnik replies h6, chasing the knight back and creating breathing room while attempting to control immediate threats. Wesley So activates r-don, doubling pressure on central files and preparing to invade the heart of Kramnik's shaky position. Vladimir Kramnik answers e5, striking the center boldly and trying to seize initiative before Wesley's coordination becomes overwhelming. Wesley So plays rd7, planting a rook deep like a spear and threatening to dismantle Kramnik's fragile defensive coordination. Vladimir Kramnik replies r8, bringing the rook into play to confront the invasion and stabilize critical queenside squares. Wesley So develops bd2, connecting rooks and adding another piece to the mounting pressure suffocating Kramnik's position. Vladimir Kramnik counters with b6, preparing queenside structure and searching for counterplay in an increasingly cramped battlefield. Wesley So returns with re1, shifting the rook to strengthen central threats and renew pressure against Kramnik's overworked defenders. Vladimir Kramnik plays k6, stepping forward bravely into the center, hoping activity compensates for his king's dangerous exposure. Wesley So reinforces with rd3, building a powerful battery and preparing multiple entry points that threaten to tear defenses apart. Vladimir Kramnik replies c5, pushing the pawn to challenge central lines and desperately claw for counterplay amid growing pressure. Wesley So advances forward, driving the pawn forward like a hammer to crack open Kramnik's center and intensify the assault. Vladimir Kramnik jumps and cheek6, repositioning his knight to active squares, hoping to ignite counterplay before Wesley's initiative becomes overwhelming. Wesley So unleashes rg3, swinging the rook laterally to coordinate threats against the kingside and pressure every weakness Kramnik shows. Vladimir Kramnik responds re8, bringing rook support to the center and bracing for the storm. Wesley is assembling piece by piece. Wesley So pushes fc5, blowing open the structure and forcing Kramnik to confront dangerous files that expose his wandering king. Vladimir Kramnik strikes back with g5, advancing the pawn aggressively to create chaos and disrupt Wesley's attacking harmony. Wesley So answers h4, challenging the g-pawn head-on and escalating the kingside fire as both players brace for heavy exchanges. Vladimir Kramnik develops bg7, reinforcing dark square control and preparing his bishop to counter the rolling waves of Wesley's pressure. Wesley So captures exec5, opening the h-file and shredding Kramnik's kingside further, inviting direct attacks against the vulnerable king. Vladimir Kramnik replies spec5, grabbing material while attempting to activate pieces and hold the collapsing center together. Wesley So plays rf3, swinging another rook into the attack and sharpening threats that now point relentlessly at Kramnik's king. Vladimir Kramnik captures Hixc5, reopening lines and trying desperately to free his position, despite the dark clouds closing in. Wesley So answers Bx5, eliminating the pawn and tightening his grip as more attacking lanes open toward Kramnik's battered defenses. Vladimir Kramnik checks with Bd4, using the bishop to disrupt coordination and seek precious tempo while under immense pressure. Wesley So blocks with Nf2, calmly neutralizing the check and preparing to counterstrike with even greater force next move. Vladimir Kramnik steps Kd5, marching his king forward dangerously, gambling that activity might save him from Wesley's tightening nets. Wesley So activates Ardon, aiming the rook directly at the exposed monarch and threatening to slice through Kramnik's fragile structure. Vladimir Kramnik plays Rj8, doubling rooks on the g-file and attempting to generate counterthreats against Wesley's king position. Wesley So responds b4, planting the bishop dominantly and pointing its blade at key central squares to suffocate Kramnik's hopes. Vladimir Kramnik counters with Re2, trying to invade Wesley's camp and distract him from the relentless hunt on the exposed king. Wesley So advances c3, strengthening the center and creating safe haven squares while restricting Kramnik's active piece ambitions. Vladimir Kramnik grabs Rxbt2, snatching a pawn and desperately seeking counterplay, though his king remains dangerously overextended. Wesley So continues with Cxdx4, smashing the center open and turning the board into a minefield aimed directly at Kramnik's king. Vladimir Kramnik recaptures Next4, using the knight to maintain central presence and cling to activity despite the perilous landscape. Wesley So replies b3, targeting the knight and threatening to unravel Kramnik's coordination as the attack grows sharper. Vladimir Kramnik captures Rxatvo, grabbing another pawn and hoping material gains offset his king's treacherous exposure. Wesley So plays r4, lining up the rook with central pressure and preparing decisive threats against Kramnik's scattered forces. Vladimir Kramnik answers Rafur, using the rook to halt infiltration and create tactical puzzles that might delay Wesley's decisive strike. Wesley So jumps Nefur, planting the knight powerfully in the center and renewing threats that suffocate Kramnik's already cramped army. Vladimir Kramnik moves K6, stepping his king toward the queenside in a desperate attempt to escape the tightening tactical net. Wesley So continues Nc3, repositioning the knight to chase weaknesses and prepare a coordinated assault on the vulnerable king. Vladimir Kramnik plays Ra3, activating his rook deeper and searching for counterplay despite the looming storm around his monarch. Wesley So captures Bx4, removing the knight and ripping away one of Kramnik's last active defenders in the central battlefield. Vladimir Kramnik answers Cx4, reopening lines but worsening his structure as survival grows increasingly difficult with each exchange. Wesley So jumps Net-Wu, redirecting the knight towards strong squares and preparing to clamp down on Kramnik's scattered pawns. Vladimir Kramnik pushes d3, racing the pawn forward in hopes of creating counter-threats in a rapidly deteriorating position. Wesley So strengthens with Rf3, coordinating pieces and tightening control as he prepares to suffocate Kramnik's shaky defenses completely. Vladimir Kramnik brings Ratvo, keeping the rook active and searching desperately for tactical resources to avoid immediate collapse. Wesley So answers nf4, centralizing the knight and amplifying pressure as Kramnik's king faces fewer safe squares each moment. Vladimir Kramnik advances d2, pushing the passed pawn dangerously and offering one last counterplay spark amid overwhelming pressure. Wesley So activates kf2, bringing his king closer to the action to reinforce key files and prepare for the final constricting advance. Vladimir Kramnik pushes b5, launching a queenside pawn thrust to gain space and create distraction despite his king's looming danger. Wesley So counters with rc3, checking decisively and forcing Kramnik's king to keep running as safe shelter becomes impossible. Vladimir Kramnik steps kb7, moving toward the corner in hopes of finding a defensive fortress against Wesley's relentless pursuit. Wesley So jumps in d5, a dominating leap that slams new threats onto the board and tightens the noose around Kramnik's king. Vladimir Kramnik answers rg7, redirecting the rook to reinforce his king and brace for the avalanche of tactical blows incoming. Wesley So plays rb3, shifting the rook with surgical precision to target weak pawns and restrict Kramnik's already suffocating mobility. Vladimir Kramnik pushes a6, trying to secure queenside structure while desperately hoping to carve out breathing room for his monarch. Wesley So responds nb4, driving the knight forward to clamp down critical squares and amplify pressure on Kramnik's fragile position. Vladimir Kramnik moves r4, seeking counterplay with rook activity and threatening to stir complications on the queenside. Wesley So eliminates rxd2, capturing the dangerous passed pawn and extinguishing one of Kramnik's last remaining hopes for counterplay. Vladimir Kramnik counters c5, using the pawn break to pry open lines and generate final tactical attempts against Wesley's dominant forces. Wesley So drives nd5, planting the knight with crushing force as he prepares to finish encircling the embattled black king. Vladimir Kramnik plays rd7, lining up his rook defensively and clinging to the last remnants of structure as pressure mounts. Wesley So follows with rf3, reinforcing his control and preparing to invade decisive squares where Kramnik has no room left to hide. Vladimir Kramnik tries r4, pushing the rook aggressively forward to counterattack and create last-ditch complications. Wesley So strikes rf6, coordinating flawlessly and lining up deadly threats that leave Kramnik's king exposed to imminent disaster. Vladimir Kramnik retreats k7, attempting to sidestep the incoming storm and hoping to postpone the inevitable a few more moves. Wesley So keeps pressure with rd3, mobilizing his pieces in perfect harmony as he prepares a final collapsing attack. Vladimir Kramnik pushes c4, advancing the pawn in hopes of opening lines and distracting Wesley from the kill. Wesley So answers ort3, switching gears quickly and aiming new threats at the kingside to overwhelm Kramnik's overstretched defenses. Vladimir Kramnik defends with rd4, stepping into the center to challenge Wesley's coordination and prevent immediate infiltration. Wesley So continues nb4, planting the knight on a dominant outpost and cutting off key escape routes from Kramnik's desperate king. Vladimir Kramnik pushes forward 6, doubling down on defense as he tries to craft a barrier against Wesley's tightening grip. Wesley So mobilizes RH, unleashing twin rook pressure that dramatically intensifies threats around Kramnik's collapsing fortress. Vladimir Kramnik captures XFX, snatching the rook with check and fighting fiercely to generate counterplay in the chaos. Wesley So calmly recaptures RxFX, restoring material balance while keeping his deadly attacking formation intact. Vladimir Kramnik follows with RD21, checking to disrupt coordination and try forcing Wesley's king into slight discomfort. Wesley So responds KF3, stepping forward boldly and turning the check into greater central control and attacking prospect. Vladimir Kramnik advances F5, pushing the pawn in desperate search of counterplay as his position continues to crumble. Wesley So activates Ra6, slamming a check that drives Kramnik's king further into danger and tightens tactical domination. Vladimir Kramnik slips KB7, retreating into the corner, but finding little safety as Wesley's forces encircle swiftly. Wesley So pushes Rax-F5, capturing the pawn and clearing the queenside while sharpening threats that leave Kramnik increasingly helpless. Vladimir Kramnik answers KB6, stepping his king forward again in search of activity despite the tightening tactical noose. Wesley So continues Ratvu, preparing to invade deeper and cutting off escape squares, signaling the endgame's brutal arrival. Vladimir Kramnik defends with RD7, setting his rook to resist the encroaching white forces in a final stand. Wesley So presses Rate, driving the rook aggressively to dominate the back rank and prepare decisive finishing blows. Vladimir Kramnik plays Decisive, trying to escape into the center again, even as danger grows with every step. Wesley So advances NCT2, rerouting with perfect precision to deliver threats that close the remaining escape routes around the king. Vladimir Kramnik counters I7, bringing the rook to challenge Wesley's invasion and stave off immediate tactical collapse. Wesley So pushes R5, bringing the rook to a crushing post and coordinating threats that tighten around Kramnik's exposed king. Vladimir Kramnik advances C3, forcing pawn tension and hoping complications might delay the decisive breakthrough. Wesley So replies R5, checking sharply and driving the enemy king into ever more precarious territory. Vladimir Kramnik moves KB6, stepping backward with dwindling safe squares as Wesley's attack grows suffocating. Wesley So activates G4, advancing the pawn to pry open more files and unleash dangerous mating nets around the trapped king. Vladimir Kramnik plays K5, running to the edge in desperation, though danger stalks him relentlessly across every square. Wesley So pushes G5, slicing open kingside lines and amplifying pressure as the walls close tightly around Kramnik. Vladimir Kramnik answers K4, fleeing deeper into enemy territory in one last, frantic attempt to survive the hunt. Wesley So continues K3, bringing his king into the fray to support the attack and seal off escape routes permanently. Vladimir Kramnik defends with RD7, clinging to structure and trying to construct a final shield against the approaching white forces. Wesley So strikes G6, unleashing the pawn like a battering ram to tear apart the last defensive fragments around Kramnik's king. Vladimir Kramnik counters b4, pushing a pawn desperately to generate counterplay and fracture lines near Wesley's forces. Wesley So reinforces r4, placing the rook in a dominating position as the final curtain nears for Kramnik. Vladimir Kramnik offers kb3, stepping forward with the king yet again, in a desperate bid for activity and survival. Wesley So captures nxb4, removing the pawn cleanly and crushing Kramnik's hopes of creating meaningful counterplay. Vladimir Kramnik replies Rezavin, checking to gain a tempo and delay the inevitable collapse for one more move. Wesley So blocks re4, defending calmly while maintaining absolute control over every critical square. Vladimir Kramnik answers rg7, trying to generate kingside counterpressure, despite the overwhelming dominance of Wesley's pieces. Wesley So plays rg4, shifting the rook with intent to neutralize threats and reassert crushing pressure across the board. Vladimir Kramnik checks Rezavin, repeating with desperation as he runs out of meaningful defensive resources. Wesley So responds kf3, stepping his king forward confidently and tightening the grip over Kramnik's rapidly collapsing position. Vladimir Kramnik counters rg7, but the rook's repeated maneuvers reveal his limited options and exhausted defensive structure. Wesley So advances and checks, planting the knight deep and unleashing decisive threats that leave Kramnik's king nearly paralyzed. Vladimir Kramnik plays r8, trying to maintain a defensive hold, but finding his resources dwindling with each passing move. Wesley So pushes g7, detonating a passed pawn that rockets toward promotion and threatens to end the game immediately. Vladimir Kramnik advances c2, pushing his own pawn in a final desperate sprint for counterplay before the walls fall. Wesley So plays nv40, delivering a sharp check that drives the king into hopeless territory with no shelter remaining. Vladimir Kramnik responds kc4, stepping into the open but finding every square swarmed by Wesley's tightening net. Wesley So strikes nct1, capturing the pawn cleanly and extinguishing Kramnik's last flicker of counterplay on the queenside. Vladimir Kramnik checks kd5, trying to escape yet again, while the noose continues to tighten around his wandering king. Wesley So smashes rg6, delivering an unstoppable final strike that leaves Kramnik helpless, sealing a brilliant, crushing victory. The video ends here. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thank you again, everyone. See you in the next video.